it goes without saying, where rights for immigrants have been swiftly and chaotically rolled back across the board. The scale and pace of change has been staggering, and I note this is not the first time the word staggering has been used today on a panel. And the current administration's tactic of flooding the zone can leave us all feeling paralyzed. But there also rises from the rubble the opportunity to ask new questions. Questions like, how might disruptions to the workforce and businesses created by anti-immigrant policies reorient our public conversation about immigration to help us understand it as a force of stability and strength for America's economy? Mass deportations have also made clear how intertwined the lives and fates of Americans and immigrants of all statuses are. In fact, new CMS research just published last week found that in this city, 1 in 9 New Yorkers, almost 1 million people, live in a mixed status household. So the question becomes, how can the tragic reality of family separation and community disruption galvanize broader support for undocumented immigrants? And we must also ask, what will the future of the US refugee program and the asylum seeker system look like when we emerge from this current administration? How could it work better for the nation and for newcomers? If you would forgive me for quoting another Briton here, Winston Churchill was credited as saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Our speakers are here today to help ensure we do not waste this crisis, but instead think collectively, broadly, and with imagination about strategies to promote the rights of immigrants today and in the future. So without further ado, I'm delighted to announce our speakers. Juan Carlos Cerda is the Texas State Director for the American Business Immigration Coalition, a bipartisan group of more than 1,700 CEOs with the mission of promoting common sense immigration reform. John Slocum is the Executive Director of Refugee Council USA, a diverse coalition advocating for just and humane laws and policies, and the promotion of dialogue and communication amongst government, civil society, and immigrants. Kelly Ryan is president of Jesuit Refugee Service USA and has held many leadership roles in immigration and humanitarian law and policy, both for the US government and in international organizations. Michele Pistone is the founding faculty director of the Mother Cabrini Institute on Immigration, chair of the Refugees and Migrants in Our Common Home Initiative, a law professor at Villanova University, and perhaps most importantly, a fellow at the Center for Migration Studies. We will hear from our speakers now, and as the last panel, we do have no time to run over before we have to give this lovely room back to Fried Frank, so please be mindful of time, and then we will open up to the floor for questions if we can. Juan, I'll turn it over to you first to tell us about your advocacy work at the American Business Immigration Coalition.
Thank you so much, Rosalie, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say it's quite an honor to be serving on a panel with one of the founders of the Mother Cabrini Institute, and I think she's watching over us. So, raise your hand if you got to see the movie. It was a wonderful movie and very inspirational. And she's a personal patron saint of mine, even though, is she canonized? Yeah, she's canonized. Okay, now I know. So, as Rosalie mentioned, I'm the Texas State Director for the American Business Immigration Coalition, or ABIC, and we promote common sense immigration reform, and some of our board members are here in New York City and across the country. Just to give you a few examples, Andrew Tisch, co-chairman of Lowe's Corporation Hotels, Carol Siegel, co-founder of Crate and Barrel Furniture Stores, and Don Graham, who used to own the Washington Post. And we have a track record of passing federal policies that have helped mixed status families. During the first Trump administration, we persuaded President Trump, 16 Republican senators, and the majority of Democrats to support $600 stimulus checks for over 1 million U.S. citizens. And why that was important is because these million U.S. citizens had been left out of the CARES Act during the COVID-19 crisis just because they were married to undocumented spouses. And our leaders thought that that was deeply unfair to penalize these citizens for having married for love. Just a few months afterward, once Democrats had taken control of the White House and Congress, we persuaded President Biden and Congress to not just give $1,200 stimulus checks to U.S. citizens married to undocumented spouses, but also $600 stimulus checks for every U.S. citizen child of an undocumented person. So that was a huge accomplishment that just shows just how deeply ingrained the undocumented community is in this country, and to the point where they're in mixed status families. And I guess the last example I'll give you is just over a year ago, where we persuaded President Biden to issue an executive order that created the Keeping Families Together program, which in my opinion is the biggest executive action on immigration since at least the DACA program, which, in the Keeping Families Together case, 2,000 undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens were able to get a work permit, and 80,000 people applied. It would have helped up to 500,000 if not for the Attorney General of my state, Ken Paxton, who filed a lawsuit against that program, and then leading to a federal court deciding that the program could not move forward. So those are just a few examples of things we've done, and it hits home for me personally as a DACA recipient myself, who came to this country at the age of 3, grew up in Dallas, Texas, and thanks to an executive action was able to have the privilege of having a work permit, driver's license, and protection from deportation. And so this mass deportation issue is something that our business leaders are deeply concerned about, and especially in a place like Texas where there's ongoing litigation. In fact, a week from today, we will see a federal judge in Houston determine whether Texas DACA recipients can even have access to work authorization, which would be a huge, terrible thing for my state, with 89,000 DACA recipients having to make the decision of living in the shadows again and not being able to legally work. So we'll see what happens with that specific case. And so what I'm going to talk about is really just I'm going to situate us in what's happening currently. I know it's been discussed a little bit, but right now we're about 1,200 average daily arrests by ICE, which is up from 650 at the beginning of the Trump administration, but down somewhat from the over 2,000 average daily arrests that we saw in April and May, when we saw raids all over the country, Los Angeles, New York City, and Chicago. And 73% of these arrests have been of people who have, quote unquote, no criminal record. They haven't been charged with any crime. And so those facts just point to the absolute truth that President Trump is delivering on his promise of mass deportations, the largest mass deportation in American history. And so when we saw President Trump winning, we immediately started strategizing as to how we can turn the tables around, so that, because before the election, more than 55% of American voters supported mass deportations. And so we wanted to have the pendulum swing back in terms of public opinion. So when Tom Homan visited Chicago in December of last year, we met with him, and he told us that he would prioritize the arrests of criminals, but he would also conduct collateral arrests, or arrests of undocumented immigrants that ICE interacts with. And he told us that if we didn't like that, that we go to Congress and ask them to change the laws. And so that is why what we did is we began to go to Congress beginning in March of last year, taking over 240 business leaders representing industries like agriculture, hospitality, construction, and Hispanic business, which we knew would be the most impacted by this enforcement. And we met with about 121 congressional offices, including some prominent ones like Senator Bernie Moreno, Republican from Ohio, Ruben Gallego, Democrat from Arizona, and the Chief of Staff for the Secretary of Agriculture. And we shared polling with them from Speaker Mike Johnson's preferred pollster, American Viewpoint, showing that, yes, by and large, American voters supported President Trump's policies on the border, the deportation of people who have committed crimes, quote unquote, and but also the concept of some kind of legal status or work authorization for long-term tax-paying and law-abiding immigrants. And to just throw out a few numbers there, 81% of general election voters supported this concept, as did 71% of Republican primary voters, and 83% of Hispanic, actually it was higher, 90% of Hispanic voters. So the outcomes of that advocacy was that two of the members of Congress that we met with, Congressman David Valadao of California and Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar of Florida, who were both Republicans, they went and shared this polling with President Trump at a fundraiser in Washington the week after our fly-in. And a week later, President Trump started saying a whole bunch of things, starting at the Liberation Day announcement of the tariffs, where he said, and I quote, "We want immigrants, but we want them to come legally. They have to love our country. We want them to help the farmers. We want them to help the automobile workers." So since then, President Trump has stated or made comments on the idea of a work authorization program for longtime trusted workers in farms, hotels, and restaurants. And he said this about 10 times in the past 4 months, which is, if you look at his first administration, he only made such comments once a year during his first administration at the annual Farm Bureau convention. So clearly our advocacy moved the needle somewhat in terms of getting the president to realize or to pay attention to his business base, his business constituency. But as we've all seen, those comments have not materialized into actual policy. And that is primarily because of Stephen Miller. So I'm not here to be a Pollyanna. I'm not here to say, we are going to get President Trump to issue some kind of executive order or work with Congress on work authorization program for long-term immigrants. But what I am here to say is that we have been and will be playing a role in communicating the economic and the political consequences of enforcement-only policy. And so we have learned a few things through this advocacy. One is that these industries do respond and do get involved whenever there is overreach on enforcement. And I'll just give you an example of a raid that happened in Lovington, New Mexico, to a dairy farmer where ICE agents, and that's an area that voted for President Trump in a blue state like New Mexico. ICE agents came into the farm without a warrant. They came in pointing guns at cows, not safe. And they arrested about 20 dairy workers. So in a mere hours, the number of workers dropped from 50 to 30. And so we were able to get video footage of this raid and send it to Congressman David Valadao, who himself is a dairy farmer. And he was able to go to a White House lawn party and show this video to President Trump, who upon seeing it said, and I quote, "This is BS. This is too aggressive." So we also got that video in front of Secretary Brooke Rollins, thanks to our advocacy with the chairman of House Agriculture, G.T. Thompson, who Secretary Rollins called the president, telling him to do something about this aggressive enforcement. And so that was what began as a serious move within the administration to roll back some of this enforcement on work sites. And so thanks to our relationship with the Restaurant Association, we were able to get a major restaurateur and somebody who works within the administration to call the president as well and ask him to include farms to include restaurants in this exemption on worksite enforcement. And so for a time, we did, or at least for a few hours, we saw DHS give guidance to ICE agents to not conduct enforcement on farms, hotels, and restaurants. But as y'all probably saw, there was pushback publicly from far-right figures like Laura Loomer, Steve Bannon, and the late Charlie Kirk. So unfortunately, the administration rolled back its guidance. And so that's not what we wanted, but that shows you that, one, industry does lean in when they're deeply impacted, and two, is we do have allies within that administration who support us, like Secretary Brooke Rollins, who I actually got to see a week ago at the annual dairy convention. A very nice lady, and she supports what we're doing. So how do we think that that this could look like in the coming months, or do we think there are opportunities for Congress and the administration to work together on some kind of policy, whether it's executive or legislative? Well, we recently went to D.C. about a month ago, where we met with more than 201 congressional offices. And again, we presented updated polling from the Terrence Group, which does polling for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, showing just a widespread support among Republican primary voters, general election voters, and Hispanic voters. And what we learned from that trip was just four things. One is that Republicans are very concerned that their business base, has been impacted by this enforcement, and that the business community is really stretched thin in terms of pool of workers. They're in this labor crisis, essentially. Two is that the reality is that President Trump still needs to lean in and bless any legislative action by Congress in order for some of these Republican members of Congress to do anything on this issue. And the third thing is there was openness to look at specific solutions that address Republicans' concerns, namely on quote-unquote border security, but also on addressing the labor crisis and solutions like the Dignity Act, which I know many of you have your own thoughts and feelings on this legislation, but to hear openness from Republican members of Congress to look at this legislation was quite surprising. And the last thing we learned was that Democrats, they honestly don't have a unified strategy or willingness to be more vocal on this issue. And we heard a lot of frustration from Democratic offices with Democratic leadership. They all happen to be from New York, right? About not being more vocal on this issue. So clearly, both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, have to do more for this issue to be addressed. And so I'll just conclude with what we think will be the coming months, which is, we've already seen a decrease in public support for the administration's enforcement efforts, especially among Hispanics. 46% of them voted for President Trump and Republicans in 2024. But now that's 25% of Hispanics having a favorable view of President Trump, and 2/3 of them prioritize immigration, with 1/2 of them opposing deporting all undocumented immigrants. So that's why we're working closely with Hispanic business, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, National Restaurant Association, and in my home state with the Texas Association of Business to really deliver not only the economic consequences, because the Federal Reserve of Dallas says that if high interior deportation continues, it will shave off 1.81% of GDP by 2027. Those are the economic consequences, but the political consequences for Republicans and for Democrats as well will manifest themselves, and that is, perhaps a historic number of Hispanics showing up in 2026 to vote against these policies. So that's what we will be doing in the coming months for 2026, is just continuing to engage with the industries of hospitality, construction, agriculture, and Hispanic business, really driving the media narrative that there's an actual connection between enforcement-only policies and the high level of prices, which everybody has been complaining about for God knows how many years now. And then finally, just communicate the consequences of failing to act on this issue to lawmakers, both economic and political.
Thank you, Juan. We heard from Becca Heller earlier today about the importance of the immigrant rights movement aligning with business interests. So it's really illuminating to hear the specifics of how that's been going on the ground in your plan. So thank you. And we'll hear from John now, who can help us continue that thread of the public response to immigration and building broad coalitions.
Great. Hi. Thanks. And thanks everyone here for making it through the day. I know that this is the last panel before the gala, so I'm going to try to keep it lively and hopefully keep you awake. I shouldn't have any difficulty with that because I'm coming here from Chicago, where I live. So while I'm supposed to talk about hope, I have some feelings, and they may emerge. I don't need to rehearse what's happened in this country in recent years. I just want to put it out there. This immigration and refugee policy seems hard to read as anything other than bad faith and a reflection by the hardcore wing of the administration of truly an agenda of white supremacy. Okay, I think that needs to be said. I don't think it's been said a lot today. And when you get to the point where you're starting to speculate about the possibility of extending the restrictions that are in place with the travel ban to the ability of individuals from those countries to get asylum or to have their status adjusted, which is under current consideration by the administration, I think we're really in a very, very bad place. Signs of hope. Oh, no, wait, I've got more complaints first. Bill Canny did a good job of outlining the presidential determination for refugees this year, 7,500 Afrikaners, but not just Afrikaners. There's another clause in there that talks about, quote, victims of illegal or unjust discrimination. And from some chatter that made it into the press some months back, there's speculation that that may be referring to neo-Nazis, FDP in Germany, those who feel that their free speech rights have been infringed. Of course, for any refugee, whether or not they're even going to make to meet all the criteria, of course they've been discriminated against, right? That's not the refugee standard. So that's a complaint, and oh, here's one more. I really appreciate Amy Gottlieb's point earlier in the afternoon about, do I see Amy? Hi. About, it's not just those without a criminal record whom we need to protect. And I've come around to a point that a lot of advocates have been making recently. It's self-evident that it's not, quote, the worst of the worst that are being targeted by immigration enforcement. It's self-evident, and we have the figures now that the minority of those that have been picked up in recent months have a criminal record. But who's the worst of the worst here? I think it's those who are showing up in full battle gear, masking their faces, and pulling landscapers off the yards of my neighbors in Oak Park, Illinois. So that's complaint number 2. How did we get here? And we got here in part through, as was explained in the last panel, through an asylum system that is overly complicated and slows down adjudication, builds up a backlog, it's under-resourced, and it keeps the focus on the border. But I think we also got here through a willingness to drift from a range of viewpoints on immigration, but a fairly solid center that said we can resolve this problem, to a flat-out, to the point where a lot of institutions in society are afraid to touch immigration. And I look back 12 years ago when I was actually, visiting the Senate on the day that the 2013 CIR debate began in the Judiciary Committee. I think back to Chicago, where in 2013, the time I was working for the MacArthur Foundation, we were one of the funders of a report by an entity called the Midwest Immigration Task Force, and the title of that report was U.S. Economic Competitiveness at Risk, and it was a bipartisan, business-oriented group that said, we need immigrants. And by the way, that panel sort of from that panel emerged the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition, from which emerged the American Business Immigration Coalition. And I can't thank you enough for all the great work that ABIC is doing these days to keep that business case for immigration alive. So I'm going to talk about two things that give me hope. And one is what's been happening in Chicago, and I should say the response to what ICE and CBP have been doing in Chicago. And the other is a project that my organization, Refugee Council USA, apologies to Refugee Congress, which is in the room, is undertaking. So on the local front, RCUSA itself is based in D.C. I happen, as I mentioned, to live in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a close suburb of Chicago. I'm 1 block west of Chicago city limits, and I'm 6 blocks due east of the Broadview ICE processing facility. So there's been an uptick in helicopter traffic overhead the last 2 months. Operation Midway Blitz has turned that center into like a focal point of national importance, I believe, as protesters have been met with tear gas, have been met with pepper balls, as clergy have been treated with great brutality as they've come to witness, to pray for, and to seek to minister to those who've been deported. But Operation Midway Blitz began in early September. In early October, the Illinois State Police came in and sort of inserted themselves between ICE and the protesters at Broadview. I'd like to say that eased tensions a little bit. It hasn't necessarily. The state police also had some very brutal approach to the protesters, but it did free up ICE to be able to come and go pretty freely. And they went into the neighborhoods of Chicago and into the suburbs, and in certain instances throwing tear gas around civilians and school kids. In other cases, the incident that Mario began our day with, this kidnapping of a daycare worker, and it has just pissed people off in Chicago. I mean, there may be some who believe that this is about public safety, and there may be some that believe this is about immigration policy, but you have awoken a furious dragon across Chicago, and the community response is what gives me hope. A year ago, there were 6 rapid response teams around the Chicago area. Now there are 36. It's hundreds, if not thousands, of people who on a regular basis are patrolling, looking out for ICE presence, alerting their neighbors, blowing whistles, distributing Know Your Rights information. And yet still, I mean, again, in my neighborhood, in my suburb, in many others around the city, you've had people, pull up to private property, go into the private property without a warrant, and pull a day worker into detention who's there to do landscaping or construction or what have you. So I know this has gone on in other cities as well. If you don't live in Chicago, you're probably not getting the saturation coverage and the full occupation of your mental space by it as I have in recent weeks. But there has been some great pushback. A week ago, Friday, I think it was, there was a letter published by the head of the Chicago Chamber of Commerce, the former head of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, really saying this ICE enforcement activity has gone way too far. What you may not have seen, there was a letter by more than 36 retired journalists, including well-known TV anchors in Chicago, some of them with a national profile as well, like Bill Kristol. And they published a letter that I just want to quote from, because it says, "For years, you watched and listened to our coverage of the Chicago area. As journalists, we did our best to bring you accurate, objective information, et cetera, et cetera. We hope we gained your trust. So please trust us now when we say that what is happening in Chicago area is wrong. The fact that some federal immigration forces may be leaving soon is cold comfort, given the damage they've done and what they may do in other cities." And they go on and on. This dragnet seems to be based on racism and is snaring citizens of color, documented immigrants, and people who have committed no serious crimes, your neighbor, friend, coworker, babysitter, and landscaper. People whose work ethic and honesty have contributed to the city for years. So that gives me hope when we see business leaders, when we see journalists, when we see the Catholic bishops. And again, it's not pandering to thank the Catholic bishops one more time for that statement. Although, yeah, maybe it is pandering, but it was a great statement. And again, the ordinary people that are coming out. That gives me hope. And it's not just happening in Chicago, as we heard earlier, in the D.C. suburbs. My cousin who lives in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of D.C. talks about the walking bus through which neighbors are bringing kids to school whose parents won't, are afraid to leave the house. And it's that rapid response, it's that mutual aid, folks buying groceries and otherwise helping take care of families who can't basically show their face in public these days. It really does give me hope for the long term, because it's building some habits that when ICE returns to Chicago in force, as they say they will in March, there'll be some muscle memory there. Okay, so what is RCUSA doing? We had with this umbrella organization, we do a lot of advocacy. We're going to continue to do the kind of defensive advocacy we need. But early this year, our board endorsed an action plan with 2 goals. And the first goal was to defend protections for refugees and other forcibly displaced people. And the second was to reimagine those protections. And it's the reimagining work I want to talk about, because I think we all in our own spheres need to have something concrete where we're planning and acting for the future. And in the case of this reimagining work, we just launched a task force on the future of refugee resettlement. And we're on the brink of being able to announce all of the personnel. Beth Ferris is the rapporteur, Beth known to many of you all. Brandon Prelogger, formerly the head of the chief of the International and Refugee Affairs Division at USCIS, is a co-chair. And Jonathan Majok, who heads the Refugee and Forced Displacement Program at the Migration Policy Institute, is another co-chair. I may be scooping myself in those announcements, but anyway, the point is, this is a multi-stakeholder thing. Even though we represent the resettlement agencies and others, they're a small presence on the task force with a heavy emphasis on state and local actors, including current and former state refugee coordinators, Office of New Americans personnel, economic development actors on the local level. About a third of the panel will have lived experience of immigrant or refugee status. And we really hope that this, through a year-long series of deliberations and a very open-ended table with a lot of input from other actors, can come out with ways that to improve the refugee system so it's better than it was on January 19th, right? This administration is laying down rails that will be, in all likelihood, persistent. The transfer of initial resettlement from ORR to PRM, as it was mentioned earlier. The greater emphasis on the states and localities. But we can take those changes and find ways of making sure that they reflect a wide range of values and interests and bring us back into the business of having an effective and efficient refugee resettlement program when the political window opens for that to happen again. So in part, by having this kind of task force and having it focusing specifically on resettlement, we want to stay in the lane that we as RCUSA know best, but our membership crosses domains with those who are working on asylum, who work with unaccompanied children, who work on immigrant rights more broadly, and we want to be in dialogue with those areas. And we also want to make sure that we're contributing to the broader immigration policy planning processes that are going to be going on in the next 1, 2, 3 years, and making sure that humanitarian pathways and resettlement in particular have a place in any future plan for immigration policy writ large. So I think with that, I've probably exhausted my time. Started with Chicago anger and hopefully ended with Chicago hope. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to CMS for letting me come today. I feel as if CMS is a sister agency. So you'll all know Don Kerwin, who will be with us tonight. But again, thank you, Mario, Rosalie, and Kevin for the opportunity to be here. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce my fellow Jesuit Refugee Service Regional Director, Joe Hampson, is here. I brought him all the way from Bangkok so he could join us today. So please give him a warm welcome when you get there. We are at the end of the day, and honestly, many of the things I was going to say have been said, so I'm not going to repeat points that people made more eloquently than myself, but I'm going to offer a couple stories, as Gregory did, and then some concrete, I hope, ways to move forward. And I'm going to take everybody back. I'm going to talk a little bit about asylum today. And I'm going to take us back to 60 Minutes and ICE Director Slattery, who in 1992 announced that he was going to end asylum. And Anna Gallagher in particular will remember this. I was a very young attorney wondering, what was going on, and I was suddenly in charge of writing the asylum reform regs. But I must say, it was why it is interesting to me, and we're kind of almost in the exact same, it's deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra would say, but what did happen then was there was true panic and true cross-cutting collaboration to try and fix asylum. There was a recognition that asylum is an important part of our heritage, that it's an important thing that the United States has led on, that it certainly predates the 1980 Refugee Act, and it was something that we must preserve. And so that was very, very important. We actually teed it up so that when the Clinton administration came in, we gave them the regs, so it was ready to go, and there was a huge Rose Garden ceremony, and Doris Meisner said it was her greatest triumph in her 8 years of government. But there were things that we allowed to develop, and Thea's mentioned some of them that have contributed to the situation we're in today. There's other things that were external that I should point out, but and I would say on those, it's the complete polarization of the United States society now. It's the absolute distrust and lack of confidence in institutions. So people don't trust the press. They don't trust universities, academic researchers, sorry to you all. They don't trust institutions that 50 years ago, 30 years ago would be trusted and people would have confidence in. So that is a huge effect. And then what has also happened, of course, is we permitted asylum backlogs to grow astronomically. We didn't address the smuggling and trafficking correctly, and the border became a focal point. I said this earlier today. I think CNN and Lou Dobbs contributed with this daily drumbeat of this idea that migrants are bad, they're criminals, they're taking your jobs, they're murdering your wives, they're something that is dangerous, was a mantra that occurred. And instead of addressing that on by pointing out that actually immigrants to the United States are far less likely to commit a crime than native-born people, or talking about the benefits of it, we got in this fight that that's racism. And that was sort of a really bad rabbit hole that that the debate got into, which has led to, I think, some of the polarization. So people like Justin and the people at More in Common, I think, have done a good job of trying to look at the evidence base for that. And so I think it's very important to try and not fall into that rabbit hole again. And I think Thea said the false choice that we can't have border security and clear standards. That's total nonsense. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. So I think I'll try to offer 5 or 6 ideas here to see what you think. First, I think, and many have said this, but we need to retake the narratives. We need to be able to tell the story of immigration using evidence, using great storytelling. We need, in our way at Jesuit Refugee Service, we're doing a number of things. One is we've started an Ignatian migration dialogue. And so we've had, most recently we had Archbishop Wensky on, who gave a superb and very moving interview where he talks about his life as a Polish American child in Florida. He talks about his role, only offering Mass in Creole for 25 years in Florida. He talks about the fact, and he's really, I think, quite accurate in messaging this. The border is secure. Now we need to stop working on mass deportation, which is harming our businesses. It's breaking up our families. It's causing chaos and disruption. It's causing danger. Both people won't come forward as witnesses or victims of crime. It will also lead to people not seeking medical treatment, which could lead to spread of infectious disease. There's all sorts of aspects to it that affect not just the person who's afraid, but the community much more broadly. So we're going to continue the Ignatian Migration Dialogues and look forward to getting new panelists on there. We're also doing a lot of op-eds. We worked with a center-right or right-wing consulting firm, and we also took information that we gained through Interaction, which is another umbrella organization which Jairus is a part of in addition to Refugee Council USA. We got very, very good information from pollsters that the Trump administration used, and a lot of the data would surprise people in the room, and they were shocked. It didn't shock me, but that's because I actually know Republicans. Most people in the room didn't really know any Republicans. So they were shocked to find out that there was large white Republican support for foreign assistance, that they did not think immigration in general was a bad thing. They thought it was a very good thing for our country. And it's, I think what Justin said, the messaging that worked with white Republican men over 50 and women of all color and age was it's not either or, it's yes and. So we can secure our border, we can have a good system, we have needs at home, and we must address the needs of American citizens, but we can also do foreign assistance. And when it's 0.0012% of the national budget, then people were much more comfortable. But I think, again, it's this evidence-based. People are constantly thinking that the data show that people thought that 30% of our national budget went to foreign assistance. For humanitarian, it's 0.0012. I'm just going to keep repeating that because it's a good soundbite. I think we have to use what we call the prophetic voice, which that means, of course, for us, using Catholic social teaching. Anna already covered a few of the points I was going to say, but I'm going to dig in a little bit further for the non-Catholics in the room and just mention we have really framed and rooted our advocacy work on Capitol Hill, in the newspapers, on television, in Catholic social teaching on the concepts of the freedom to stay, the right to migrate, and the right to return in safety and dignity. And our Holy Father has been using that language. All the popes since Leo the 12 have used that language in pronouncements. And so it's not just a modern idea. It's embedded in early church teaching, but really since Rerum Novarum, it has been language that's been used. And the idea, again, for people who aren't familiar with this right to stay means the right to flourish in your home community, the right to be safe, to raise your family, to have a job, to live in dignity. That is the basic teaching of the church. The church teaches you shouldn't have to move. That's the duty of the state, to create conditions where you can thrive. And that's what the Bishops' Conference and Mexican and U.S. Bishops' Conference talked about in the 2003 beautiful statement. The right to migrate, this is the one that really is under siege right now, and that's why we've rooted it in Catholic social teaching. You have a right to leave if you are going to be harmed. You have a duty to take care of your family, to move them if they're going to be harmed. You should not sit there and let it happen to you. You need to get up and go. And I think that was something really in the early years, Michele will know this too, we always enjoyed, I think it, in some ways different from the UK and Canada, the United States in the past 30 years, normally asylum was sort of, we kind of like that get up and go aspect of it. You know, the asylees came here, they didn't ask for a handout, they wanted to work, they say to you at the port of entry, I've come to get a job, but I can't go home. And so that can-do attitude, that kind of, that was very inspiring to us, and the system in the UK and the system in Canada much preferred pre-selected people that would sort of follow the rules. I think in some non-American countries, it was asylum is viewed as queue jumping. And I think that's a very unfortunate way to look at it. I think it's resilience. I think it's, intelligence. It's making the right choices to get up and move. And then the last one, which is now getting more and more important with what's happening with this mass deportation, is the right to return in safety and dignity. It doesn't mean putting somebody in a country where they've never been before, they don't speak the language, and they have no resources. That's not safety and dignity. No one would think that that's safe or dignified or humane. So we have all three of those pillars that we're trying to expand into the secular world as important convening or unifying principles. I would also say that, and this has been said too, but I do think it bears repeating, we need to find non-traditional allies. It's not just the business community. It may be the generals. It may be the chambers of commerce. It may be the agriculture, the needs in agriculture, and making reasoned arguments to them. Self-interest arguments is, I think, perfectly appropriate and useful. But the non-traditional allies is key. I'll tell one story from our early time. As Thea mentioned, we've had 5 efforts at having a domestic violence rule. During the Bush administration, Attorney General Ashcroft was looking at whether he should grant asylum to RA. The case had been referred to him. And our NGO colleagues very, idealistically thought, well, we're going to ask NOW to write a letter. And I told him that was a bad idea, and instead we asked Concerned Women for America. NOW had, I think, 50,000 members. Concerned Women of America had more than 1 million, and it was right-leaning. And that letter got on his desk, and so he did not reject RA's claim. It didn't grant it either, but he would have, I think, rejected if we hadn't done it. So you have to find the voice that will make the convincing argument. We've had some great success ourselves on the Hill, and one of the things we've done that I'm very proud of is our points on foreign assistance are actually where the conference came out on it, and we've been working very hard on that. We also, no one said it today, so I hope I beat Michele on this, but we think it's time to talk about cancellation again. Cancellation is an answer to a lot of difficulties. It would permit us to get large numbers of people regularized. You could charge an amount of money for them to do that, but this would save us having to go through court systems and bog down those. So I think that's something that we need to think about as well. We've also really worked very hard on or speaking directly to Republican staffers and Republican members. We spend the majority of our time talking to them with arguments that they want. I will say we've never gotten yelled at or screamed at. I guess a year ago we went up and there was words exchanged with one Senate staff. But I think what we're hearing from them is that they also are worried about both foreign assistance and immigration. Whether or not they're going to speak publicly about that still remains to be seen. But I think we have to keep the pressure on and make the good arguments. The last point I want to make of these about what we need to use to get there is for Catholics, I think we need to make this a religious liberty issue. If our institutions are attacked, we need to make the case quite correctly that we do our work because it's our deeply held religious views. That's why we're doing this work, and that means it's a no-go zone for intrusion into our organizations, our businesses, our agencies. I would say also, if you're looking at the data, 18% of American Catholics are affected by mass deportation. 18% will have a family member affected by that. And as Dylan has said, these are people in our pews in our churches. These are not some stranger. These are people that are in our families and that we need to defend from this onslaught. I think the last thing I would say is, like John, I work very hard on the refugee admission side. I think there's a lot we can do there, and I think we can make some good changes there. But you have to ask yourself, how is it that a refugee admissions interview is conducted in 45 minutes and asylum interviews are taking 6 and 8 and 10 hours? There's something profoundly wrong with that statement. And so we need to really, refugee admissions we can do lots of fun and cool things that we've thought of for a long time and haven't really fully done, like, focusing on eligibility rather than exclusion, focusing on exclusion rather than eligibility, and doing kind of Lautenberg more broadly. But in asylum, we really need to go back to square one and really ask ourselves, how is the best way to make sure that somebody can have a fair opportunity to make their claim, where they understand what the system requires. We elicit the information. We don't bog down immigration court with asylum cases that could be properly taken affirmatively, and look at it that way. I think those are really some of the most important things that we'll have to address in the next year or so. And I am optimistic. I'm a optimist by nature, so I don't think we need to wait for the midterms. I think we need to begin the work now. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Kelly. I know we're going to finish with Michele at the podium.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know what I was thinking. I have so many slides. So I don't even know what I'm going to end up doing here because it's crazy. So, okay, so I'm supposed to be I'm the last speaker. I'm supposed to be kind of instilling hope. So that's my goal here. We know that Catholics matter. It mattered in the vote for Trump and matter now, like in the fact that all these families are being impacted. And okay, so I'm from Villanova, and Villanova's in Philadelphia. And sometimes I have to remind my students and my community that at one point, we were being persecuted, right? So this is such a great reminder that people were opposed to papal aggression and Roman Catholicism. They were opposed to nunneries and the Jesuits. And yet, we came through that time. There were these riots in Philadelphia where Catholics were being killed on the streets, and people were warned to stay indoors. The Augustinians Church in Philadelphia was burned to the ground on May 8th in 1844. And then Pope Leo, an Augustinian, was elected to the papacy on May 8th, 2025. And we were really lucky because we had an audience with him recently in Rome, and he shared a message of hope that I'll share with you. I'm really excited because after that meeting, Bishop Seitz met with him, and then there was this momentum toward this message. And so here, this is a sign of hope. We said that. Let's appreciate that we're making this progress. This is the first time in 12 years, right, that the bishops had gotten together on any kind of special message. So that's really exciting. So this was Pope Leo's message. So we were working toward action plans. It's a group with some of the people in this room. It's a collaboration with Jesuit Refugee Services, with CMS, with Cabrini International Migration Institute, and we met. And Pope Leo said this: as you continue with your gathering, I'd like to suggest two themes that you might consider integrating into your action plans: reconciliation and hope. One of the obstacles that often arises when dealing with difficulties of such magnitude is an attitude of indifference on the part of institutions and individuals. My venerable predecessor spoke of the globalization of indifference, where we become used to the suffering of others and no longer try to alleviate them. This can lead to what I have previously referred to as a globalization of powerlessness, in which we risk being immobile, silent, perhaps sad, thinking that nothing can be done when we're faced with innocent suffering. And I feel like what we're hearing today about what's happening in Chicago and in other places is that people are not falling into this globalization of powerlessness, right? They're taking action. They're moving forward. And I feel like the bishop's statement, it's another example of how we are going to mobilize against this globalization of powerlessness and become powerful. So at Villanova, We started just recently the Mother Cabrini Institute on Immigration, and yes, it's an honor to be doing this work in the name of Mother Cabrini, who was the first American to be named a saint, by the way. And we're going to be working on these 4 areas: research, teaching, advocacy, and service with migrants and refugees. The teaching, I've been working on Vista for a while, and that also brings me so much hope, because what I'm finding is that there are so many people in the community who want to take action, who want to help immigrants. And so what Vista does is train people to become accredited reps, akin to what Clinic is doing, where we're building capacity of people who are not going to go to law school, but who are giving them the education they need in order to become advocates for immigrants. And my colleague, Robin Lieberman, who's in the room, is working on building it into, with a lot of other people, is working on building that into a career path, so people can think about becoming an advocate for immigrants the same way that we train up nurse practitioners, right? So nurse practitioners for immigration law. And the other thing that we're starting out of the Mother Cabrini Institute, and again in collaboration with a lot of people in this room, is Refugees and Migrants in Our Common Home. And that represents a vision to mobilize a worldwide community of academics, of administrators, community partners, and refugees and migrants themselves to work together to serve migrants and refugees. So as I said, we worked on this project in collaboration with a lot of the groups that are in this room, and Mario and Susan Martin were on the steering committee. I'm trying to, and we're really working towards this common vision of thinking of universities and our community partners working together towards change. And we've been collaborating as well with the MIT Systems Awareness Lab. So that's a group of academics who focus on systems change. So how do you make systems change? And it's been really interesting, and I'm going to go through these slides really quickly, but I could always kind of, if anyone's interested, we can go over it in more detail. You can get involved in the project and learn it from them yourselves. But before that, I just want to share this clip about hope. So this is a clip from On Being by Krista Tippett. It's a podcast. And I was listening to this as I was working on Our Common Home. I was driving to pick up my daughter at school. And I heard it, and I literally pulled over on the side of the road and called my colleague at MIT, because it just speaks so much to what we need to hear right now. So I just want to share this little clip.
It's an orientation, really, more than a virtue, a way of seeing and moving through the world. And it is a choice in the face of profound, reasonable despair. It is a calling. It is a practice, a muscle. And like any muscle, it can be flexed and strengthened. That kind of hope attends to reality in all its complexity, and it makes a leap of imagination that has real-world consequences. Here's one way to define this kind of hope. It looks the world full on, it looks reality in the face, and it refuses to accept that things have to be this way. And then this orientation of hope throws one's intelligence, one's energy, one's persistence, one's creativity and courage behind that insistence. It's one of these elemental truths that we have to remind ourselves of, sometimes name, in order to see that nothing new has ever entered this world without someone or someones who first imagined a possibility others couldn't yet see or believe in, and then brought realities into being that most of us can later not imagine the world without. Again, this is a truth that has small manifestations and vast manifestations, individual and communal. And this is a young century in which we have a world to remake, all of our disciplines, all of our communities. And it is in this context that I see a revitalized, chosen, practiced, applied hope, individual and communal, as urgent and necessary towards that possibility of a different world.
Right? Isn't that so good? Isn't that what we need to hear? So On Being, put it on your podcast list. Listen to it again, right? Because we communally, I mean, we've heard so much today about building this muscle, right? And we communally can do it. And it's a muscle. And it's something that we have to strengthen and flex and use. And then who knows what the possibilities are when we work together. It's just really inspiring to me. So I don't have much time. Okay, so this is a concept, creative tension, that I learned from my colleagues at MIT, and it's so helpful, I think, if we think about kind of when we stretch a rubber band, right? And if we start with current reality on the bottom, and then we stretch a rubber band to our vision. So our vision, of course, is going to be much higher than current reality, and especially where we are now, right? So there's so much tension in that rubber band. And sometimes when we feel that tension, we can't really change current reality right away, so we might lower our vision. But what my colleagues at MIT teach us is that the creative tension is actually part of the structure of how we make change. So we know right now we're in this place where we're feeling so much tension, but we should realize that that tension is actually a source of creativity and growth, because it's through that tension that will start kind of lifting the current reality to get it closer to the vision. And that's really what we need to be kind of grabbing onto. So even though we have these visions that are really different than where we are today, to just hold on to the fact that that tension will be the force that gets us there. And so the other thing that we've been working on to understand in terms of systems change is this idea of an iceberg, and how we often have events that we see that are kind of over the surface of the water, but that in order to make systemic change, we have to really get down into the mental models, the artifacts, the underlying structures. We've heard so much of that today. I feel like every person on these panels has spoken about changing the narrative. Changing the narrative is about mental models, right? It's about figuring out how to get people to think differently. And it's when we really invest in that we'll be able to make the systems change. I think a lot of what we do when we're reacting to situations is to just kind of react to the event and try to respond to the event. Someone doesn't have food, so the Catholic Church steps in and gives them food. Someone doesn't have a work authorization, so we try to work with them on that, but not necessarily thinking about the underlying structures. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly, but with mass deportations, we actually went through this exercise, and we found different policies and different ideas about what was, and it's a lot of the things that we were talking about today: scarcity mindset, xenophobia, us versus them, fear, criminal, the fact that we talk about immigrants as criminals. And if you're interested, we actually populated this, and we did this a few times with a group of people who were working with Our Common Home, and you can actually get to the QR code and look at it more deeply. But again, it's so much of the messages that we heard today with Justin and everyone talking about, how do we actually change the way we think about immigration? And I guess what I'm learning from MIT and our colleagues there is that this is where the work has to happen in order to make the systemic change. So that's another, I think, way of being hopeful, to realize that we're all we recognize the importance of this changing of the mental model work, and that we have a lot of colleagues who are working on that and giving us the tools to be able to make that change. The other message from Pope Leo when we met with him was to work on reconciliation. And I feel like in a way that's another message that we've heard today. Thinking about partners that we didn't always work with, thinking about how to talk across difference. And so here he said, just as Pope Francis spoke about the culture of encounter as an antidote to the globalization of indifference, we must work to confront the globalization of powerlessness by fostering a culture of reconciliation. In this particular way of encountering others, we meet one another by healing our wounds, forgiving each other for the evil we have done, and also that we have not done, but whose effects we bear. This requires patience, a willingness to listen, the ability to identify with the pain of others, and the recognition that we have the same dreams and the same hopes. This is a video from the conference that I was talking about, and I thought I would end with this because I've shown it to a lot of people, and it has given them signs and feelings of hope.
Your time together begins a 3-year project with the goal of creating action plans, focusing on 4 core pillars: teaching, research, service, and advocacy. Just as Pope Francis spoke of the culture of encounter as the antidote for the globalization of indifference, we must work to confront the globalization of powerlessness by fostering a culture of reconciliation. As you continue with your gathering, I would like to suggest 2 themes that you might consider integrating into your action plans: reconciliation and hope.
Over 100 million people are currently displaced. It is a massive humanitarian challenge that echoes in our conscience, and also an opportunity to build something new, all together.
In October 2025, 250 academics, teachers, community partners, and refugees and migrants themselves met together in Rome, not just for a conference, but to launch a 3-year project in which we're working together to come up with solutions and shared goals for the community to collaborate on going forward.
Universities are not only places for thought, they're essential in empowering the next generation to shape the future. This project calls on the academic community to lead through knowledge, compassion, and shared responsibility.
Education is the only most useful support that we can use to empower the refugees and support them to solve their issues. So I'm here to advocate for the education of refugees and also migrants. And I hope after the event things will be very nice. Here it's refugees and migrant education in our common home.
Today, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment, so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor.
This is not a one-off initiative. It is the beginning of a 3-year process. Together, we are co-creating global action plans
focused on 4 pillars, which are teaching, research, advocacy, and service with migrants and refugees.
We want to change underlying structures, not just alleviate emergencies, to move from fragmented responses to integrated solutions, because transforming the system is also an act of love.
Because what we need is to have conversations between people of different backgrounds, different understandings of the world, so that we have a truly rich and fully alive human understanding of what it is to be on this world.
When we educate a migrant, we create a society that is better equipped to face the challenges of the future. Migrants are not defined just by their movement. They are people who bring capacity, who bring talent, who bring ambition, and who bring hope for all of us.
Seeing all of you here brings me hope that change is possible during this Jubilee of Hope.
This project is open and growing. It's about transforming systems through compassion. It's about instilling grounded hope. It's about compassionate systems change. There will always be a gap between current reality and vision. And in this, we can see, perhaps, is there an invitation to see this as a creative force? A way that we might energize ourselves to steadily, faithfully improve current reality towards our vision.
I came looking for tools and I found a beautiful community.
Inspired by the Jubilee of Hope and the Holy Father's call to action, we believe a different future is possible, and it begins here.
In listening,
in reflection,
in shared action.
Thank you so
This
much,
pisses
Michele,
me off.
for your
They
comments.
strip table salt down.
This is not the theme we were going to end our symposium with. So we do have time for one question. I think we have one here. Yep, we have a microphone.
Dmitry Glinsky, Russian-speaking Community Council. My question will probably add to the list of John's complaints, New York complaint, Chicago complaints, but also hopefully address something that was said here about finding new allies. So I'm from a smaller immigrant community that is often under the radar, and I'm grateful to many friends here, such as Catholic Charities and others, for bringing those folks who are on the margins or outside of major faiths into these conversations. Right now in communities such as ours, the Russian immigrant folks and Iranians are being deported in large numbers, including people whose asylum cases not only have been proven and known, and people who have a very clear record of opposing autocracy, fighting for human rights in their native country, and they are just deported into the hands of their persecutors. And not many media write about this. I think that brings a question about the issue of national security for the United States. Because the papers, for example, government papers in Russia, and I don't read Iranian papers, unfortunately, but they are glowing, saying that America that you thought about they're telling the opposition, the Democrats, human rights advocates, that America doesn't exist anymore. It's everywhere the same now. And Europe will soon be just like Hungary with a little bit more effort. Isn't that an issue where part of the national security community in the United States might become a significant ally, and would Refugee Council, which is doing great work on various areas, and other partners here somehow bring this to attention, that this is a major issue, and the struggle, the war on migrants that we have heard today about is part of a much larger war in which we are all involved one way or another. Thank you.
Just to say something very, very brief in response, with specific reference to this task force on resettlement, we recognize that while we're grounded in values of humanitarianism, human rights, that there are multiple legitimate lenses through which migration and resettlement specifically are and should be considered. Those include national security, they include geopolitics, they include economic interests, community interests, and we hope to be, I knew I couldn't say that word, polyperspectival in that respect. It's 5 o'clock. And it is wrong to be deporting Russians and Iranians to places where we know they will be persecuted. It is wrong to be deporting Bhutanese to places where they are unwelcome and are likely to face renewed persecution. This is happening, and it's a national shame.
Thank you, John. Unfortunately, we are at time. If you enjoyed this event, want to hear more from CMS in the future, we do have our mailing list with QR codes on the table, and we will be sending out post-event recordings and also slides via that mailing list. So please do make sure you're subscribed. We'll now hear closing comments from our Executive Director, Mario Russell, but before that, please give a final round of applause to our panelists.
Thank you, panelists. And these will not be remarks as much as just simply a closing goodbye. But John, let me just say that I think you must have channeled your inner angry Chicagoan on that last slide. But that's good. That's good. I don't know what they were angry about, but something. But thank you, panelists. Thank you, Michele, for sort of taking us home a little bit there. This is very helpful. Thank you all for coming today, for your sharing of your experience, your expertise, your ideas, your passion, and as has been said many times over today, I think your hope. Hope does not disappoint, Anna, yes. Hope is a choice, and hope is abiding. And I hope also that I see some of you at the gala, and trust that I'll see you there. And if not, I'll see you or see many of you in the next conference, convening, webinar, or other encounter that we will have with CMS. So thank you very much. It's great to see you.